When I think of video games that featured ninjas on the Nintendo Entertainment System, I'm sure like many of you, the Ninja Gaiden series is the first that comes to mind. The Gaiden games were never the tightest 2D action titles mechanically, but they were ahead of their time as far as storytelling is concerned. The cinematic cutscenes featured throughout the franchise still stand out in my mind all these years later, a testament to their greatness. The other aspect of Ninja Gaiden that I recall is its soul-crushing difficulty level. In fairness, this was a trademark for countless NES releases, for a variety of reasons, including arcade-style gameplay weighing heavy influence on developers, those very same developers doing the majority of playtesting for their own games, and then the thriving rental market playing a factor in game design philosophy. With the popularity of Ninja Gaiden, naturally other developers would try to create games based on ninjas. Some early examples of this include the multiple Ninja Turtle games released on the NES, but there were other smaller titles that received cult followings such as Wrath of the Black Manta, a late release based on the 80s comic book series Zen Intergalactic Ninja, and the subject of today's video, Shadow of the Ninja. Released some 5 years into the launch of the NES in North America, Shadow of the Ninja, or Blue Shadow in Europe, is a game that rarely comes up in conversation, but is beloved by those that have experienced it. With nostalgia being as powerful as ever, remastering a relatively rare NES game that is now over 33 years old isn't as crazy of an idea as it might sound. But is Shadow of the Ninja Reborn a blessing in disguise? Or is this franchise Donatello? Let's find out in our full review. Before we get into the review, step out of the gaming echo chamber's shadow and support independent content at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames to gain Discord access, early shows, and more. Also, hop quick like a ninja over to twitch.tv/idreamofindiegames and follow along for epic live streams Tuesdays and Thursdays. Your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. Shadow of the Ninja Reborn takes the core NES game and changes the visuals to a 16-bit aesthetic while adding new gameplay tweaks, an energetic soundtrack from original composer Iku Mizutani, and even goes as far as to feature an additional level. This is a fairly ambitious undertaking for a game that could have easily been dumped off as a quick and dirty port of the original with a few bells and whistles. Instead, Tango Project, in collaboration with Natsumi Atari, have delivered an excellent 2D action title that brings the same visceral challenge as the original. Shadow of the Ninja Reborn features the same basic storyline of the original game with slight changes. In the North American version of the NES original, the game took place in the United States during 2029 AD. In this version of the game, we are introduced to the city of Laurasia. The city has been overrun by demons led by Emperor Garuda, the same villain featured in the original. Two ninjas enter the fray named Hayate and Kaida, tasked with putting an end to Garuda's evil reign. Players would be forgiven for missing the story entirely, as much like an NES classic, it is imperative that you wait a few moments before starting your gameplay to see the opening cutscene. Trust me, it's worth the wait. The game features two modes of play, the first being an arcade mode which can be enjoyed at normal or hard difficulty via single player or local co-op. The other mode is Time Attack, which is exactly what it sounds like. In order to play levels in Time Attack mode, they'll need to first be completed in the arcade mode. Players will also have leaderboards to compete on, giving the game a bit of replayability and undoubtedly opening up the potential for epic speedruns and the bragging rights that come along with them. As far as options are concerned, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn is a rather bare-bones affair. Visually, PC players can change the resolution up to 4K if they wish, or add some scan lines, but not much else. On the audio side, sound effects can be toggled independently of music, which allows players to favor one over the other, or you can keep the audio balanced. As far as game settings are concerned, you won't find much either, with simplistic options to turn your Ninja Gear display on or off, or use a shadow step feature. The game does feature a gear catalog as well, where you can view many of the items and weapons that you collect throughout gameplay. When it comes to gameplay, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn feels quite a bit different from the original. In the NES version, Hayate and Kaida played the same as one another for the most part, but here the developers have tried to make each character feel more distinct. The core mechanics are the same regardless of your choice though. A standard katana attack is available, a secondary attack which allows you to strike foes from a distance, a jump, shadow step for dodging, and the ability to cycle between healing items, energy drinks, and weapons is present. Hayate is marginally slower than Kaida, however his jumps feel more precise. While Kaida does have that small speed advantage, she seems to jump as if weights are anchoring her down, leading to many jumps falling short of their target. Because both characters also have the Shadow Step ability for dodging, this negates any net positives for Kaida, making her feel like the inferior choice between the two. This was a bit disappointing, as I personally enjoy playing as female characters in my games, but sadly doing so in Shadow of the Ninja Reborn makes the game a little bit less fun to play. Even worse, choosing Kaida means hearing the same annoying battle cry constantly, as each time she attacks she lets out an irritating yelp akin to a squawking crow. Regardless, it is a difficult game, whether you play on the normal difficulty setting or hard, though is still more forgiving than some of the earlier NES games because you do have that life bar. The hard setting did lead to more aggressive enemies, but didn't feel as drastically different from normal as I expected. In fairness, I spent the majority of my time playing on normal, which had me veering towards fits of rage as it was, so I wasn't exactly eager to jump into hard and go all the way through the game that way. Much like many 2D action games, your goal is to traverse treacherous levels while platforming, wall running, hanging, dodging, and slashing your way through enemies en route to defeating an end area boss. The game features 6 levels total, the 6th being entirely new for this version of the game. Levels are broken up into sections, with each section acting as a checkpoint that you can continue from. Each level also has a timer, though fear not, as plenty of time is given to complete a level, and it rarely plays a major factor. That said, players will be scored based on performance upon defeating a boss, which nets them in-game currency. When starting a new run, this currency can be spent to purchase weapons and healing items to bring into battle. The enemies encountered throughout Shadow of the Ninja Reborn are mostly mechanical robots. They fire homing missiles, laser beams, pellets, and will often follow you to no end. It is a game where taking your time and learning is crucial to your success. Some situations may require you to be standing in a very specific location to carefully dish out or avoid damage. Level design feels pretty solid throughout, and will punish you for losing your patience, which can happen often. Rarely will rushing through a level end in triumph. In this regard, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn remains true to its predecessor, rewarding players who learn its level layouts and enemy AI patterns, but again, much like the NES original, it was known as being a little more forgiving when compared to games that were released earlier on that console. To even the playing field a bit, this version of the game has a more robust weapon and inventory system. Players can slot in up to 7 items that can be cycled through during your gameplay. Weapons range from giant bats that dish out additional damage, to shurikens, and even meat that can be consumed to restore health. There's also an energy drink that you can consume which will power up your blade, and you can shoot beams from it, which is awesome, one of my favorite attacks in the game. Tapping the shoulder button allows you to cycle to your next item in the queue, however you'll need to hold and press on the directional pad to cycle through all of your inventory as opposed to the nearest item, which feels rather clunky in my opinion, especially in the heat of battle. On the subject of mechanical shortcomings, hanging from ledges and wall running didn't always feel perfect either. There were far too many times when tapping up, which is used to hoist yourself on top of a ledge while hanging, didn't feel as responsive as it should and led to me falling and taking a large amount of damage. This can be pretty frustrating and even lead to burnout, but thankfully the game gives you a reasonable amount of health, as I've touched on, which is always greatly appreciated. Even with some of its mechanical flaws, in its best moments, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn feels satisfying, challenging, and tense. The game's difficulty will delight retro gaming fans who love such challenges and leave players of moderate skill levels whimpering. Later levels are so dick-blisteringly difficult that some players may never live to see level 6 at all. Despite some frustrations, I ultimately enjoyed the mix of close range and more distanced combat, and while the platforming did at times leave something to be desired, the gameplay overall delivers what retro gaming fans usually seek. You may also be wondering how well the co-op element of the game works, and to my surprise, it's a little bit better than I expected. Yes, you do run into a lot of the issues you would expect out of a 2D action game, like your player not being able to keep up, or vice versa, and as I mentioned, the characters aren't equally balanced, but we did still have some fun playing the game this way. I would say co-op is more of a fun novelty than the ideal way to play, but it does add an additional level of challenge, and playing with a friend or loved one locally is always welcome. Perhaps the biggest change to Shadow of the Ninja Reborn is its visual facelift. Upgrading from 8-bit to 16-bit may have taken over 30 years, but it was worth the wait. Character and enemy sprites are now gorgeous to gaze upon, and they animate beautifully. Level backdrops are also full of vibrancy and life when compared to the original game. Not to be hyperbolic, but this is one of the most incredible visual redesigns of an NES game that I've come across. When you see the two versions side by side, it's just impossible not to applaud the art team's efforts. From futuristic airships to gorgeous skyline views of the city and massive bosses, the game is downright beautiful in motion, and to accompany the new visual aesthetic is an excellent set of compositions from the same man that created the original game's score. The result is a rocking new version of one of the NES' best and often forgotten soundtracks that sounds outstanding. The high energy and fast-tempoed compositions of the NES chiptune music feel completely revitalized with blazing guitars and relentless bass and drumming. Backing the soundtrack are crunchy sound effects which are well implemented outside of the previously mentioned yelping of Kaida. When factoring everything, this new version of the game looks and sounds amazing. Shadow of the Ninja Reborn is a surprisingly ambitious undertaking that delivers mostly great 2D action. While some of its gameplay mechanics could have used further refinements, and the character differences are pretty disappointing, the visual overhaul and outstanding soundtrack are great achievements. I also enjoyed the addition of new weapons that add an element of strategy the original game was missing. Heck, even some of the boss battles were a blast to figure out, even if I came close to tossing my controller through the screen on more than one occasion. Fans of the original game should celebrate this release, while newcomers may discover a hidden gem that they didn't even realize existed. Regardless of where you land, Shadow of the Ninja Reborn is a lovely reminder of the past that doesn't feel out of place in the present. As some of you know, we score games on a Genie Lamp tier system, with Bronze being a good game, Silver being a great game, and Gold being essential to your indie gaming library. We also have the Indie Krampus for those less than satisfactory titles, but we try to keep him locked away as much as possible. With that said, I am awarding Shadow of the Ninja Reborn the Silver Genie Lamp of approval.